The most common cause of erectile dysfunction in younger guys who don't have the ravages of time, age-related changes, medical conditions causing a buildup of injury and damage to their body tissues. Young, healthy guys, their most common cause of erectile dysfunction is a problem with the signaling to release nitric oxide. If a man has performance anxiety, he's unsure if he's going to have a good solid erection because maybe he had trouble the previous time. His body releases adrenaline. We release adrenaline when we're faced with any kind of a stress. Now, adrenaline helps us survive physical stresses like being mauled by a bear or, falling off a cliff and having some major injury to an arm or a leg. The adrenaline causes the blood in our arms and legs to decrease, and it shunts it to our heart, lungs, liver, brain, and away from our less vital structures like our arms and legs, so that if something terrible happens to us physically, we won't bleed out immediately. We'll conserve our blood and hopefully survive this physical stress. But that same adrenaline is released if we think, I wonder if I'm going to have trouble having an erection like I did last time.
Welcome back, legends. I'm Callum Weir, your host on this journey of growth and transformation. This is Plant Fueled, where we bring together the brightest minds, boldest voices, and biggest hearts to explore the science, stories, and strategies that shape a better future. Today's guest is one for the books, Dr. Aaron Spitz. Dr. Aaron Spitz isn't just a urologist, he's the go-to authority on all things men's health, known to many as America's #1 penis doctor. If his face feels familiar, you probably remember him from the groundbreaking documentary, The Game Changers, where he flipped the conversation on nutrition and performance with an experiment that sparked global debate. Dr. Spitz is also the author of The Penis Book, an unfiltered deep dive into everything from size and function to optimizing health in ways most people are too shy to ask about. But we don't just shy away from the real talk here. In this episode, we explore the often taboo topics that matter most. Erectile dysfunction, the surprising role of food and exercise on men's health, and how something as simple as nitric oxide can make a massive impact. We go further into cultural narratives and self-confidence, and why it's time to stop tiptoeing around these conversations. It's raw, and it's going to change the way you think about penis health. Not just for you, but for everyone that's got a penis or knows somebody with a penis. So whether you're tuning in for insight or inspiration, this episode is for you. Dr. Aaron Spitz is here to demystify and destigmatize the topics that have been kept in the shadows for too long, bringing humour, heart, and hard-hitting truths to the forefront of penis health. Whether you're here to learn, reflect, or share this knowledge with someone who needs it, this episode will leave you inspired and empowered. If this episode has sparked something in you, if it's made you think differently or inspired you to take action, then I ask one thing. Hit that follow, subscribe, or leave a review, whatever your platform that you listen on allows you to do. It's a small gesture, but makes a massive difference. It's how we bring these conversations to more people, how we continue to attract the best guests, and how we keep delivering the insights that can truly change lives. So if you're here and you've enjoyed this, take a second to show your support. It means the world. Here's Dr. Aaron Spitz. Let's dive in. Peace and plants. Dr. Aaron Spitz, welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Callum. Thanks for having me.
So at the moment, I'm living in Indonesia, and the Google homepage is also in Indonesian. So when I typed in your name a few months back, everything had to be translated. And obviously, when you translate from language to language, it doesn't always correlate to exactly what's meant to be said. However, it gave you probably one of the most handsome titles I have ever seen.
Oh, what is that?
So, word for word, it said, Dr. Aaron Spitz, America's doctor with the biggest penis. And it had me in hysterics.
That is hilarious. I mean, that may also be true, but that is very, no.
It was remarkable because I know what it was meant to say. It was obviously meant to say, America's #1 penis doctor, but the translation was just amazing.
I should move to Indonesia because I'm obviously very big there.
Oh, pardon that pun.
That's great.
So, however, why we're not going to be talking about your penis, we are going to be talking about the penis, and you
Yes.
are the penis guy. So, you literally wrote the book on it. So, just for the audience that may not know who you are, who is Dr. Aaron Spitz?
Yeah. So I'm a urologist, and I reside in California. I'm in a private practice, but I've also served on academic faculty. My specialty focus is in men's sexual health and male infertility. As such, I've done research and published and care for many men with sexual health issues and male fertility concerns. I've written a book, as you pointed out, called The Penis Book, and it is a comprehensive book that covers the penis from base to tip and all things in between. It's meant for the general public. It's written in a way that's easy to understand, but it is very scientifically accurate. I've also had the good fortune to appear in a documentary called The Game Changers, in which I was able to share some information about men's health and conduct an interesting experiment to look at the possible effects of a plant-based diet on men's sexual health. From that appearance was spawned an actual clinical trial that is underway now in New York with Dr. Robert Osfeld, in which we are looking at the effect of plant-based diet on men's sexual health function in a more formalized way through an actual clinical study. And I've also had the opportunity to appear numerous times on American television to discuss various urological health topics, but many of those topics centering around men's sexual health. So that's my background.
I think you mentioned the Game Changers, and I think out of all the scenes in the Game Changers, it's the most talked about one. It's it's the one that stands out to the most people, I think, because whenever I've ever mentioned that film to anyone, they've always gone about the penis part, and I was like, wow, like yeah, it's I think it stood out a lot. And
Yeah, the funny thing about that scene is it almost didn't happen at all because I didn't think that there would be any impact on male sexual function from a plant-based diet, just one diet. I mean, I knew there was long-term benefits to male sexual health from plant-based diet, but in that movie, the challenge was, can we show a single meal effect? And I didn't think that there would be. And so it really wasn't until the very last minute that I agreed to go for this experiment because I thought it would be a waste of everyone's time and money. And lo and behold, the results were shocking and amazing. But that scene was the last scene they shot, the last scene that got edited in, and almost never happened.
so you actually never expected those results because they were significant. They were like substantial results. So because they
Exactly.
weren't
Now,
small.
the thing I say about those results is we only did it on 3 people. That's from scientific perspective, an N of 3, which really is not something you can draw sound scientific conclusions on. But there was a signal, and that signal was really strong. And based on that signal, we are now doing an actual scientific study. But yeah, I never imagined that there would even be a signal like that, because we all have come to understand, of course, that for many men, erectile dysfunction is a condition that is a consequence of aging. So as men age, it's very typical that their erections gradually get weaker. So to think that a single meal, would have an impact on something that we really think of as, in many cases, a gradual onset condition, was really not intuitive to me by any means. I didn't think that the instrumentation we had was sensitive enough to pick up an effect if there was one. And lo and behold, on relatively simple instrumentation, the effect was so strong on these 3 guys that not only could we detect it, but it was like a 300 to 500% increase in strength, number, and duration of erections for these 3 athletes the night overnight after they consumed a vegan burrito as compared with the overnight measurements after they consumed a animal-based burrito. And the reason it's an overnight measurement, the reason that's so important, is because it eliminates placebo effect. In these subjects, the erections are being measured by a special sensor called a Rigiscan while they're unconscious. So their bodies are making erections through the night, which is a normal bodily function in guys, but it's not influenced by their anxieties or their belief in something good or fear of something bad happening. It's just the unconscious brain out of the way and the body's own physiology, the circulatory health, the nerve health, all the things that have to happen to create erection, operating as it normally would under the circumstances of that man's health. And the one variable that was changed in this experiment was what they ate that night. And then what happened while they were unconscious, presumably is really a biological, physical effect, not psychological, not placebo. So very interesting.
Yeah, that's remarkable that can happen over, one night.
Right.
Just by eating something completely different to what you may normally be eating.
Right. Well, I will point out one thing so that we dispel any confusion here. This was not an experiment that looked at men who had erectile dysfunction, were given a vegan burrito, and then had normal erections. Not at all. So if a person watching this podcast suffers from erectile dysfunction, that's one of these physical causes, age-related changes. It's not that if you go and eat a veggie burrito tonight, you're going to be all better. But what it was doing was showing that young, healthy, fit men with normal erections went from a state of normal erections to even better normal erections, at least in this experiment for those three guys, from eating a plant-based burrito compared to when they ate an animal-based burrito. It was a shift across a spectrum of normal.
You mentioned erectile dysfunction, and I think when it comes to the penis, it's often overlooked. I think a lot of guys don't like speaking about it. Like if someone has erectile dysfunction, for instance, it can be seen as, embarrassing, or we just don't want to discuss it. We don't want to discuss the penis, and maybe that makes somebody feel like they're less of a man, I guess. But do you find that as like a common theme yourself, that like if somebody does have an issue with the penis, that people don't want to speak about it? There's that sense of a bit of embarrassment.
Yes, absolutely. I think that society in general is a lot more forthcoming with talking about sexual issues. But on the individual level, when a man is in my office and talking to me about his own personal sexual dysfunction, there is often a obvious sense of shame or guilt or frustration that the man is carrying. I think we all are much more willing to talk about sex these days, and maybe have a much higher tolerance for sexual materials in the public domain. But when it's our own personal issue, when it's our own personal difficulty, it's still very personal. It's still very it can be devastating for some men, and it really runs the spectrum of how it can impact a man. And it's not only impacting the man; it's impacting his partner. And there can be confusion. There can be a lack of knowledge that can lead to blame, insecurity, mistrust, and it's really not what's going on. It's a biological problem in most of these cases, and there's a biological cause that it has nothing to do with shame or trust or any of these things. So yeah, it's still a very tricky subject for many men to approach when it's a personal subject.
I think that's a good starting point, really, is like, what is the penis and what really is an erection? Because like 50% of the population have one. However, how does it work, and like why is it we're getting hard? Why is it that we can't get hard sometimes? Like what is the penis, I guess?
Yes. So the penis is a fairly complex structure. It's a hydraulic structure. It's also a structure with a significant amount of nerve innervation. There's various kinds of tissues. Some are very flexible, very strong. But more than anything, it is a vascular structure. It's an extension of our circulatory system in a special kind of way. So inside the shaft of the penis are two cylinders, like my two fingers, side by side. And inside these cylinders are a huge number of very tiny blood vessels. And if you were to look at them with the naked eye, if you were to cut across the penis and look inside the two cylinders, it would look like a extremely tiny and fine sponge mesh. And all the little spaces in those sponges are tiny little blood vessel spaces. Now, the lining of the two cylinders, like the skin on my finger, is a very strong but very flexible tissue that can elongate and can widen to allow our penises to get longer and wider when they're erect. And the reason that the erection happens is because blood rushes into these two cylinders and fills up those spongy spaces of blood vessels. Those spongy spaces of blood vessels, each space opens up to allow more blood in. And if you imagine, numerous little spaces opening up, then the whole chamber gets wider and longer. And blood flows in under signals from nerves. Some of those signals are tactile. It might be a sensation on the penis itself sending the signal to the brain, and then the brain sends a signal back down to release nitric oxide, or that signal might go to the spine and whip back around as a reflex, and that nerve releases nitric oxide, or there's a conscious thought of something sexually stimulating that sends a signal down to a nerve to release nitric oxide. And I keep saying nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the nerve signal that's released that causes all those little blood vessel spaces to open up and allow more blood in. So nitric oxide allows the blood into the cylinders. The cylinders get longer and wider, and as they get longer and wider and those spaces fill up, the pressure increases inside the cylinders, because those cylinders cannot stretch indefinitely. At some point, they reach their limit and they can stretch no more. So what happens is the pressure just builds up higher and higher. And so the penis goes from getting bigger to now getting harder. Once the penis is fully rigid, those blood vessels are fully expanded. They're actually compressing against the walls, the sides of the cylinder. And what they're doing is they're compressing and pinching off veins that are located here that carry the blood back from the penis to the body. And when those veins get compressed, the blood is trapped. And so an erection is blood that has flowed into the cylinders, expanded them, and now is trapped in there.
So it's kind of like a balloon.
It's like a balloon that is also like a tire. So like a tire, it inflates to a point and then it just gets really hard. A balloon just keeps inflating and then, to some point pops. So kind of like a tire at first, and then like a balloon at first, then like a tire. So an erection requires that there be a signal, that signal release nitric oxide, that the nitric oxide is able to cause the blood vessels to open up, relax, so that blood can fill into them, that they fill up and expand sufficiently to pinch off the veins and trap the blood in the penis. All of that is required to get an erection. And problems can happen with any one of those steps along the way, and that can result in erectile dysfunction. The most common cause of erectile dysfunction in younger guys who don't have the ravages of time, age-related changes, medical conditions causing a buildup of injury and damage to their body tissues. Young, healthy guys, their most common cause of erectile dysfunction is a problem with the signaling to release nitric oxide. If a man has performance anxiety, he's unsure if he's going to have a good solid erection because maybe he had trouble the previous time, um, his body releases adrenaline. We release adrenaline when we're faced with any kind of a stress. Now, adrenaline helps us survive physical stresses like being mauled by a bear or, falling off a cliff and having some major injury to an arm or a leg. The adrenaline causes the blood in our arms and legs to decrease, and it shunts it to our heart, lungs, liver, brain, and away from our less vital structures like our arms and legs, so that if something terrible happens to us physically, we won't bleed out immediately. We'll conserve our blood and hopefully survive this physical stress. But that same adrenaline is released if we think, I wonder if I'm going to have trouble having an erection like I did last time. And just like our arms and legs, the penis is not one of the vital structures that we preserve when we're under stress. And so the adrenaline shuts off the flow of blood to the penis and shunts it towards our heart and lungs. So, as I mentioned, nitric oxide is released onto the blood vessels to make them open up. Adrenaline comes along and causes those blood vessels to constrict and shut down. So, the cause for erectile dysfunction in young healthy guys is typically performance anxiety, which is a release of adrenaline, which is causing the blood vessels in the penis to clamp down and not allow the blood flow in the penis. And what happens is you either get your erection and lose it, or you can't get your erection at all, either or both. Now, in older guys, what's older? 40s and up, as men get older and they go through the decades, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, increasingly, they suffer from age-related changes. And all those little blood vessels I talked about that make that sponge, they get stiffer. They can't expand as much as they used to. Kind of like an old dry sponge that just doesn't hold as much water. Same thing happens in the tissues of the penis from age-related changes. And so even though there's a signal from the nerve and nitric oxide is released and there's no adrenaline to counteract it, those spaces just simply can't open up as much as they could. So the penis doesn't get as full and it can't pinch off the veins and stop the drainage back. And that's the most common cause of erectile dysfunction for men who have a physical cause. Now, nobody lives forever, but some of us can age better than others. For some, there's inherent metabolic diseases, genetic conditions, what have you, that, it's just in the cards. But for many of us, we can slow down the ravages of time. We can slow down the effects of aging on our penis and on our whole body for that matter. The penis blood vessels are so small, however, that they are usually the first to go. So as we're aging and our circulatory system is declining, we may notice weak erections years before we notice effects on more life-threatening blood vessels like our coronary arteries or our cerebral arteries. And when those blood vessels go, you get a heart attack or you get a stroke. But when the ones in our penis goes, you get erectile dysfunction. But that can often be a very early sign of impending age-related changes in our circulatory system.
I was about to say, is there any kind of correlation to obviously having erectile dysfunction at some point and then having heart disease or having some kind of cardiovascular disease impending, but it's kind of like an onset
Yes.
part of it?
Yeah, erectile dysfunction usually leads a heart attack or stroke by about 5 years. So it's not as if a man who's 23 and has erectile dysfunction has impending, heart disease. That guy's typically suffering from performance anxiety. But a man who's 50, 55, 60, who hasn't been to the doctor and is noticing erectile dysfunction may also have significant cardiovascular disease, clogged arteries. He hasn't felt the symptoms yet, but they're coming. And so, yes, it's important to pay attention. Even if we are not willing or interested in pursuing sexual function, we shouldn't ignore our sexual dysfunction if we're experiencing it, because there could be our whole body at stake.
So you have 5 steps on how to kind of improve penis health, I guess. And obviously, number 1 is what you're putting in your mouth. And I don't know if people actually put 2 and 2 together sometimes. I think that goes with, most of our bodily functions. People don't put, two and two together of what we're feeding it and how we're, what our outcomes or health outcomes or long health term outcomes are. Um, People don't put two and two together. So when we're looking at food, I'm guessing there's food that's better for the health of the penis in comparison to, foods that are going to really disrupt.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, the penis is primarily a vascular organ. It's a bunch of blood vessels that have to fill up with blood for you to get an erection. And so it's really easy to know what is good for the penis. It's whatever's good for your heart and your blood vessels. So the kind of food that we have learned is heart healthy is also penis healthy. And if we haven't learned that, then what you're going to learn right now is that the kind of food that's penis healthy is also heart healthy. So what's good for your penis is food that promotes a healthy circulation, and a healthy circulation very much relies on nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a very transient gas that's released into the inside of the blood vessel by nerve endings or by the cells that line the blood vessel itself. And nitric oxide causes the muscles within the blood vessels to relax so that the blood vessels can open up more and accept more blood flowing through them. And by doing so, more blood is getting to all the organs and all the tissues and your skin, your brain, everywhere. And the penis is just all about blood vessels. The penis needs blood vessels to get filled up, and that's your erection. And so nitric oxide can be produced by your own body, and it is produced by your own body at a very good rate, at a very healthy and complete rate in many cases, just inherently by your own body tissues up through the age of about 30. But after age 30, your own production of nitric oxide starts to drop off, and it's important to start supplementing it with diet. And diet is our primary way of supplementing nitric oxide, and the foods that are rich in nitric oxide, turns out, are plant-based foods. And foods that are poor in nitric oxide are animal-based foods. Not only that, animal-based foods often have molecules in them that counteract nitric oxide, that can actually reduce the effects of nitric oxide on the blood vessels. And so not only does eating plant-based foods improve circulation, avoiding animal-based foods improve circulation. So what you should eat for your penis is a plant-based diet. And that's good not only for your penis, but it's also good for your heart.
So those plant-based foods are really promoting good blood flow, good, nitric oxide promotion, and
and avoiding the animal-based foods that can have actual negative consequences on the blood vessels, on the penis, on our bodies. And there's a myriad of studies that have shown positive effects of plant-based eating on various aspects of our health. But what I'm saying is, for sure, on the penis as well.
And for someone that's not going to go the full way, somebody that's going to go, maybe predominantly plant-based or 90% plant-based and reduce their meat intake significantly, but still consuming meat on maybe a day, like a daily or a weekly, but not as much, is having less and eating more plants, that's still going to help them, I presume?
Yes. Studies have actually borne out that if a person is not a vegan, but eats as many plants as a vegan does, they do not quite as well, but not too far worse. And they do much better than a typical omnivore or carnivore. So if you can't be fully plant-based, but you still eat a lot of plant-based foods, and by plant-based, I want to distinguish, I'm referring to whole food plant-based. Donuts are plant-based, but that's not what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
you're not on
I'm
about
talking
Ben and Jerry's at the moment.
Yeah, that's it. I'm talking about whole food plant-based, right? Vegetables, fruits, beans, that this kind of thing, nuts. But yes, uh, studies on nitric oxide and blood flow have shown that if you eat vegetables with animal products simultaneously, they will play defense. The vegetables play defense and result in less of a negative impact on your circulation than if you just eat the animal products alone. And of course, if you eat the plants by themselves, that's the best. But plants eaten in the same setting as the animal products will actually play defense. And people who consume as many vegetables as a vegan or vegetarian will experience a high percentage of the protective health benefits of being a plant-based eater.
Is there certain foods that are better, certain plant-based foods that are better for promoting, nitric oxide? Because we know, for instance, beets are good with, blood flow through the body. But is there certain foods that work better for the penis?
So really, as I said before, the penis is just an extension. It's like an
Yeah.
outcropping of your circulatory system. And there's not a different kind of good nutrient for the penis that's not also good for the whole circulation. So there's really not a penis specific plant to take. However, there are nutritional supplements that have shown benefit on sexual function. And when they show benefit on sexual function, they are likely also benefiting other organs in the body that rely on a healthy circulation, or they may be working at brain centers that are involved in the sexual response. And in that sense, they may be more specific, such as, say, maca root, which has been shown to increase sexual desire, but not necessarily through a mechanism on the penis itself. But vegetables in general are going to give you more nitric oxide than plants. I'm sorry, than animal products. Beets are a particularly good source of nitric oxide. So are green leafy vegetables, some spinach, things like this. But by and large, whole foods are giving you more nitric oxide. And then plants are also giving you other excellent molecules for your circulatory and your organ and tissue health. Other antioxidants and flavonoids. There's a few thousand chemicals, molecules that have been identified in plant-based foods that only some of them are understood as to what they do for us. And there's a variety of different benefits that these molecules are doing for our health. Some of them are playing defense, and some of them are pro nutrients and building and sustaining directly. And the more different kinds of plants you can consume, the greater the variety of these helpful molecules you'll be able to get. Some which we have worked out, some which we haven't. And so I kind of look at the produce section as a big medicine cabinet, but without side effects, just with benefits. And, the more I can get inside of me, the better. Of course, there's going to be people that have certain intolerances to certain kinds of foods. And of course, you must work around that. But to the extent that a whole food plant-based serving is not causing you some sort of distress or allergy, go for it.
And then we move on to sexercise. And what is sexercise? Because I assume when the listeners hear sexercise, they're going to be like, that just means, sex.
Right. So, sexercise is a little bit of a play on words. But what I mean by that is that there are actually exercises you can do that may enhance your erection. And there are exercises or a form of exercise that in some men may impair erections. So the penis is not a muscle. You can't actually work out the penis the way you work out
See,
any
I
other
was
muscle.
always under the impression it was a muscle because I think from a very young age you're just told it's just a muscle.
Right. But it is not. It's a couple of cylinders filled with blood vessels, not filled with muscle fibers. However, at the base of those cylinders that I talked about, at the base of those cylinders that fill up with blood, there is muscle. Muscle surrounds it. And when this muscle constricts, it squeezes the base of the cylinders and increases the pressure of whatever blood is in there. So if blood is flowing into these cylinders and filling them up, and then the pressure is raising, and then those muscles constrict, the pressure shoots up and makes the cylinders even harder. So if those muscles are squeezed, it makes that erection kind of throb. It's not throbbing because it's beating like a heart. It's throbbing because of the constriction of those muscles. And those muscles can be strengthened. You can do exercises to strengthen those muscles, because those are the same muscles that also contract when you're trying to hold back your pee or you're trying to hold back a bowel movement. And doing a particular squeeze, that squeeze that you do when you're trying to hold back your pee or bowel movement, that's called a Kegel squeeze. Many people have heard of Kegel squeezes or Kegel exercises. And in fact, if you practice Kegel squeezing exercises, you can make the muscles at the base of those cylinders stronger. And when they go to contract as part of you getting your erection, which they naturally do, they may be able to contract stronger and better and trap that blood and raise the pressure of that blood in your cylinders better, and may allow you a stronger erection than if you didn't exercise those muscles. And that's going to be more relevant to men that are aging, because as men are aging, not only is the blood vessels within those chambers getting stiffer and not able to fill as much, but the muscles at the base of the cylinder that squeeze to trap that blood in there and increase the pressure are getting a little bit weaker. So Kegel exercises is just doing that squeeze you do if you were trying to hold back a bowel movement or trying not to pee. And you can squeeze and hold for a few seconds and release and repeat and do a number of reps. Maybe you do 10 reps at first, and then you maybe do 20, then you maybe do 50. Do it once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day. I'm doing it right now. You can't even tell. Colin, are you doing it? Are you squeezing?
I am. We could have
All
a
right.
competition right now.
Yeah. So, just call up Colin later for like a video tutorial. But anyway, just squeeze those muscles to strengthen the muscles that trap the blood in the penis. Those muscles also contract during ejaculation. And so for some men who have difficulties with premature ejaculation, practicing squeezing those muscles gets them more in tune with when they're about to start squeezing and may help them hold off a little longer, because it can become in tune with that part of the ejaculation reflex. So that's exercise. Exercise is basically Kegel squeezes. But the exercise that can impair erections in some men is cycling, bicycle riding. That triangular seat pushes up on the butt bones. And the butt bones are where the blood vessels and nerves are traveling. They're traveling under the butt bones and then on through to the penis. And sitting on that seat, for some men who are built in such an unfortunate way, compresses those blood vessels and nerves of the penis and can cause nerve damage to the penis and can cause vascular damage to the penis, reducing the amount of flow of blood that can get to the penis. Now, it's typically reversible, but with avid cyclers, with professional cyclers, there's a measurable decline in the blood flow to the penis in a fair percentage of these men. And also, cycling-related effects on female sexual function has also been noted. So for people who are avid cyclers, make sure that your seat is well padded, that you get a special seat if you need to. And if in spite of all that, you're still feeling some numbness in the penis after a ride, you might want to rethink that form of exercise, maybe consider a recumbent bike or taking a break. But that's the other side of sexercise.
Well, I think it's also good to like show that you don't need to kind of book out a necessary time slot to be doing this. You can just be doing it any time of the day. You could, be doing it right now when you're walking around the streets. You can, whenever, because
Yes.
it's not like going to booking out a time slot for the gym. It's just whenever you can and feel you
Yeah,
need to.
that's right. And another little tip to know if you're doing it right, because some people may not quite understand what they're supposed to be contracting. It's not about clenching your butt cheeks. Okay. It's a muscle that's just around the sphincter of your anus and the base of your penis. And the way you can tell if you're doing it right is that if you stand in front of a mirror undressed, um, you'll see your penis retract in a little bit, just a little bit every time you squeeze. And if you can see that little bit of retraction, then you know you're squeezing the right muscle groups.
Getting offline. That was the next one. And I think a lot of podcasts that I've listened to recently have actually been talking about things like pornography and the effect it actually does have on us, because sometimes we just think, it's just watching a video and it may be having a bit of pleasure from it and nothing's really happening, but apparently there's bigger side effects.
Yeah. So frequent viewing of pornography turns out has a very measurable negative effect on sexual function. By frequent viewing, I mean watching pornography several times a week. Now, not all men watch pornography several times a week, but many do. And some men watch pornography even several times a day. And what this does is not just psychological, but actually physical. Anatomical changes occur in the brain that can be measured on an MRI, and centers in the brain that are critical for sexual function, whether it's getting the erection or having an orgasm, and also, of course, aspects of just intimacy, emotional relations, physically shrink and power down with frequent pornographic viewing. And this causes difficulty in getting and maintaining erection, being able to reach a sexual climax, and sustaining relationships. These changes, fortunately, are reducible, but they do take several months of abstinence to see the improvement. Unfortunately, pornography is just so easily available, and people really don't understand that there's this risk. Most people think that the risk is strictly moral, but not physiological, but it is. And as a consequence of the ubiquitous presence of pornography, we are now seeing erectile dysfunction and inability to reach a sexual climax in alarmingly high proportions in high school aged boys, right? When I was a boy, pretty much anything would make your dick hard. As Eddie Murphy said in the classic movie line, my dick gets hard when the wind blows. But now, young, healthy, teenage boys, young men, up to 20% of them are having erectile dysfunction, can't get and sustain an erection, and also having difficulty reaching a climax. I mean, when I was a young man, everybody was too quick. That was just part of being a young guy, is you were quick. And then as you got older, you learned control. Now these young men are having trouble just even getting there. So it's a real thing. It's been scientifically validated, and it's something that I screen for when I'm discussing sexual function with a younger patient who's having difficulty. I will ask, are you watching pornography? How frequently? And really, a very large percentage of the time, they are watching it frequently, and that is part of the equation. And not addressing that part of the equation can leave a man insufficiently improved. Yeah,
because it is so readily available and it is so addictive. And like I remember when I was younger, like we didn't really have the availability for porn. You'd normally find a magazine somewhere in a back alley, and that was wild. Like you're like, oh wow. And then
yeah,
I remember when I had access to the internet, and although I didn't have an addiction, when I first kind of discovered it, I was blown away. And like there was was watching it more than I'd say I was watching TV, because you're kind of like so curious about how this all works. It's all completely new to you. And it's weird because I think it was a few months ago, there was an article that came out because South Korea have a ban on porn in the country, and the South Korean army had gone to another country where there's no restrictions on porn, and the South Korean army have all have been addicted to porn in the last two months, which I did not have in my 2024 bingo card. But yeah, it just shows the addictive nature of it when, especially from a country that has no access to it, then get unrestricted access to it, that there's then this addiction that can form. Because most people think, you're just watching a video. There's not really any side effect to it.
Yes, no, it is addictive because it stimulates the same brain centers that are the addiction brain centers. So, there are certain centers of our brain that light up, that activate when we encounter things that are essential for our survival. And we release dopamine, and that's this feel-good drug, and it drives us to do that thing again because, hey, we need that for our survival. Water, food, sex. Sex is something we need to survive as a species, right? If we don't have sex, we don't pass on another generation. Our species dies out. Sex is a vital function of a human being, and therefore the addiction centers are queued up to drive you to get more of that thing. And it's a feedback loop. And the more of these images we can see, the more dopamine released, and it drives us to keep seeing it. However, like so many things, our senses start to get muted. The receptors start to upregulate, and you need more and more of this signal to give you the same effect. Just like with drug addiction, drug addicts require more and more drugs to feel the same high. Eventually, they don't feel much of a high. They just need it to feel normal. And this is true with pornography. You will need more and more bizarre and more intense and harder core to feel the same degree of arousal and to get off. And that's been demonstrated because the center of the brain that drives seeking novelty gets stimulated with this feedback loop, and you get driven to seek more and more novel things. Now, novel isn't always good. Just because it's new and different doesn't mean it's good. And many men who suffer from this syndrome find themselves watching things that they find actually revolting and disgusting, but is required for them to get off because the thing that's normal to them, the thing that's acceptable to them, no longer is stimulating enough to arouse them. And it's a really tragic situation. But it is, in fact, a true addiction. But it's not just like a psychological addiction. There is a physical problem that's happening with the brain centers. And so you physiologically are having a decline in your ability to get erections and your ability to climax.
Yeah, as you said, it is very much you're looking for bigger and better, and obviously these situations that you're finding in porn aren't normal situations that most people would find themselves in. They're like there's that expectation from their partners as well, that something that's so unrealistic, and it does drive down a dangerous road when you continuously watch over and over again.
Yeah, and the bigger, better scenario is only resulting in the same or less satisfaction because you've become so blunted.
So we move to detox, I think, and detox, I think it kind of says what it needs to, but what should we be looking to detox from?
Yeah, I mean, many people have an intuitive understanding that toxic substances, whether it's recreational drugs or whether it's the toxic side effects of prescription medications, can have a negative effect on your function, including your sexual function. But, just to put a finer point on it, cigarette smoking causes stiffening of the blood vessels, hardening of the arteries. And you have to have all these little blood vessels in the penis chambers to be able to open up and allow the blood in. and cigarette smoking causes them to get stiff, and they just can't open up. And so cigarette smoking is a very profound insult to erections, and cigarette smokers get erectile dysfunction at a significantly higher proportion than non-smokers. Even secondhand smoke exposure can result in some degree of erectile dysfunction if it's significant enough. Alcohol, excess alcohol also impairs erections. Alcohol is a sedative, and it can blunt the neurologic and spinal nerve signals that are important for the release of that nitric oxide onto the penis. But it's also a cellular toxin. And so the way in which all of the cells that line the blood vessels of the penis and the cells that conduct the nerve signals function is dampened, is impaired a little bit by the cellular, just the general cellular toxin of alcohol. And in severe cases of alcohol addiction, a person can develop cirrhosis of the liver. This is where the liver is no longer able to process blood very well. It's got a lot of scarring in it, and all those channels in it that normally filter the blood are blocking up. And along with that terrible aspect of cirrhosis, there's another situation, which is there's an increase in estrogen production. And so alcoholics with cirrhosis also may have high estrogen, which is the female hormone, and that in turn causes the brain to release less signal to produce testosterone. So you can get low testosterone, high estrogen. And I didn't mention this so much before, but testosterone is an essential part of the erection equation. It's the male hormone, and under testosterone's effect, the cells of the penis, the blood vessels, and the lining of the chambers, and the nerves, the skin, all of the tissues of the penis remain healthy and responsive. And when there's a lack of testosterone, there is a decrease in the strength and integrity of all those cells. And not only does a man have a lack of desire if he has low testosterone and not really even want sex, but even if he did want sex, the mechanisms aren't working as well. The erections are weak. So alcohol is one of those drugs that can lead to low testosterone in a severe case. Marijuana is another one. Chronic use of marijuana has been shown to actually shrink the size of testicles in primates. And in humans, chronic marijuana exposure has been shown to lower testosterone. It does that through an effect on the pituitary gland, which is responsible for sending the signals to the testicles to make their testosterone. But it alters that signaling. And so men who use marijuana chronically can end up with low testosterone, low sex drive, erectile dysfunction, and also infertility. They can have a lowering of their sperm counts too. Now, occasional marijuana usage here and there really has not been shown to be detrimental to sexual function, to fertility. But one man's occasional is another man's gluttony. And oftentimes I will talk to my male patients who are seeing me for infertility or sexual dysfunction, and I'll say, how often do you use marijuana? Because it's legal in California. And they'll say, I just use it occasionally. And I'll say, okay, so then, how many times a week? Oh, well, basically just at night to go to sleep. Every night, yes. So, okay, that's not so occasional. But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's okay for you, particularly if you're overusing it. So cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, they're all legal, but they're not necessarily all okay. If you're overusing them or using them. And then there's cocaine, there's amphetamines. These can, in some cases, cause erectile dysfunction in a very acute way, and that's because of they have adrenaline-like effects. And adrenaline, as I mentioned, squeezes down the blood vessels to the penis, contracts the flow of blood to the penis, and you can get that from amphetamines. People who use crystal meth, they have an enhanced sexual experience initially, but then they go on to have severe erectile dysfunction, and it's referred to as crystal dick, just like there's whiskey dick for erectile dysfunction with alcohol. So that's detox for the stuff you can control, but then there's stuff that you can't control so easily. You may have high blood pressure. You may have medical condition that requires a medication for your survival, but the side effect of that medication may affect your erections. And so certain blood pressure medications such as beta blockers or hydrochlorothiazide have a negative effect on your erections, but you may need them. Well, what if you could avoid getting the high blood pressure in the first place and not needing those medications? Well, that's possible. That's possible with a plant-based diet. That's possible with exercise. And so detoxing also can be preventing yourself from needing medications that are toxic to you.
There's a huge rise at the moment in vaping. Everybody's walking around with a little candy floss flavored vape. Are they going to be doing? I'm guessing they're going to be doing harm as much as smoking or marijuana use would be doing, but you're still inhaling a lot of different chemicals that are going into the body. But I don't know, with it being so new, if there's so much research on that.
Yeah, so the research is really emerging now. Cigarette smoke is worse than vaping nicotine. But nicotine does result in blood vessel constriction throughout the body. And so if you want a good, healthy erection with real strong blood flow, and you have maybe some weakness in your blood vessels for other reasons, throwing nicotine into the mix is not going to do you any favors. The chemicals that are in the vape substrate are not good for you, but the extent to which they cause discrete health problems is being worked out now, and they definitely do. I mean, the research is showing correlations with various health maladies, but it's a different cause and effect than the cadmium and heavy metals and soot in cigarette smoke itself.
So moving on to snooze or lose, and I think many of us forget that a sleep affects our whole entire body. Like, not many of us get enough of it, but it really affects every part of our body. But before we dive in, I heard a myth. I don't know if it's a myth. I want you to tell me if it's a myth. A few months back, and that was that if you have lack of sleep, it makes your penis shrink.
So, in a way, yes. If we think of shrinkage as the dynamic aspect of penis size, dynamic meaning it gets bigger when it's erect and it gets smaller when it's not erect, and it gets smaller still if there's a significant adrenaline surge, it can actually constrict the size of the penis. Then yeah, that's true. But it doesn't make a fully erect penis a smaller erection. Let's put it that way.
Oh,
but why is that? Why does sleep affect erection? Well, it's interesting. It affects it in two ways. I had mentioned that testosterone is important for the health of all of the tissues in the penis, for them to work and for the integrity of the cells of the penis, of the blood vessels, of the cylinder lining, the skin, the nerves. And we men make testosterone when we are in REM sleep, when we're in deep sleep, when we are dreaming. That's when the pituitary gland sends a signal through the bloodstream to the testicle. That signal is called luteinizing hormone, and that signal causes the cells within the testicle that make testosterone to make testosterone. Not all the cells in the testicle make testosterone. The vast majority of the cells in the testicle are making sperm. But there's a small subset of those cells called Leydig cells that make testosterone, but they only make it when they get that signal from the pituitary, and the pituitary is primarily sending that signal when you are in REM sleep. So if you don't get enough REM sleep, if you don't get a good night's sleep with deep sleep with dreaming, you're going to be making less testosterone because you're going to be making less signal. And so men who suffer from poor sleep chronically, and one such population is night shift workers, even though they might sleep in the day, they're not sleeping as well. They've been studied and have been shown to have lower levels of testosterone as a consequence of getting less sleep. Now, the other reason your erections can suffer in a way that is related to sleep is because of a condition called sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a very common condition. in which a person is snoring. Maybe they know they're snoring, maybe they don't, but their airway when they snore is getting blocked. That's why it makes a sound. The air is trying to get through that, and it's a restriction in airflow. As a result, there's less oxygen getting into the blood. So a person is basically getting oxygen starvation throughout the night. That lack of oxygen puts a lot of stress on the body. And the body's reaction to stress, which I mentioned earlier in this podcast, is a release of adrenaline. Okay, so men with untreated sleep apnea are having a higher than normal adrenaline release all night long. And that adrenaline is shunting blood away from their penis to their more vital structures. So men with sleep apnea can suffer from erectile dysfunction because they have more circulating adrenaline counteracting what normally would be more blood flow to the penis. And they can notice that their penis might look smaller because during the day, there's more or less nitric oxide being released. Sometimes you get a little chubby. Sometimes you get an erection. Sometimes you're hanging more slack. And sometimes you're constricted. When you go out into the cold or a cold swimming pool and you get shrinkage, that's because the cold stress made your body release adrenaline. And the adrenaline then pulled the blood out of your penis and it shrunk up. Well, sleep apnea can do that too. So sleep is an important aspect of sexual health. And if you deliberately aren't getting enough sleep because you're burning the candle on both ends, stop doing that if you care about your penis. And if somebody tells you snore or you may suspect that you might have sleep apnea, get evaluated. Because once it's treated, then all of that normalizes. And erectile dysfunction is like the least of your problems when it comes to sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a very serious situation. All that stress on the body can lead to high blood pressure and diabetes and heart disease. It's shorter lifespan. So pay attention to your sleep and really protect your sleep.
I think one thing that I have realized from this conversation is that everything that we know is good for our bodies is good for the penis. So everything that we should be taking care of to, make sure we have a thriving, sustainable, brain, heart, health, body, everything all comes down also to the penis as well. There's no kind of wrong or right way. It's just very much healthy life, healthy penis.
Take care of your penis and it'll take care of you.
So with I don't know if you've seen the rise of the carnivore diet lately.
Yes.
How is that going to have a impact on penises in general? Because obviously people are finding real good effects from it, but obviously it's a short-term solution with not long-term health outcomes. And, anything that has a short-term solution doesn't normally have the greatest tendency in the future to allow for thriving health.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important and interesting question. The way I look at it is that there is so much scientific data now that supports the health benefits of a plant-based diet. And that data is often looking at populations of people and then stratifying according to what their diets are, how they did, how they did with high blood pressure, how they did with diabetes, how they did with heart disease, and, how long they live. And there's really a lot of data that points to the more plant-based humans are, the less chronic diseases they get. Now, the carnivore advocates are stating that you get not just the same, but even better health benefits from eliminating plants from your diet and sticking to animal-based diet. Now, one of the things that they advocate is little or no simple carbohydrates. And there's lots of science that points to the health benefits of minimizing or eliminating simple carbohydrates. So I think that there may well be measurable health benefits of pursuing a carnivore diet because of the limitation of carbohydrates, at least in the short term. Just as I mentioned earlier, that when I'm talking about a whole food plant-based diet, you got to remember it's whole food plant-based, because you can have a a plant-based diet that's just replete with simple carbohydrates, and you're not going to be so healthy on that diet. But as you pointed out, there really isn't long-term data of what happens on a carnivore diet. There's lots of people who feel great and report feeling great, but what happens to somebody's cardiovascular health? What happens to their heart attack and stroke risk? What happens to their cancer incidence? What happens to their lifespan after 20, 30, 40 years on a carnivore diet? There's no data. There's just no data. But there's so much data that compares people who are eating omnivore diets to a plant-based diet that shows that the plant-based eaters are doing better, that I think that the carnivores really have a responsibility to show long-term data before advocating for doing something long-term that this other set of studies in the omnivore diet indicate probably is not healthy, probably is carcinogenic, probably is atherogenic, probably does result in higher rates of heart attack and stroke, even if you took out the simple carbs. But I am open to the possibility that people can and do feel better on a carnivore diet, probably by virtue of eliminating the simple carbohydrates that often happens when one goes on a carnivore diet, but not because of the amazing health benefits of meat.
Yeah, because it is an extreme elimination diet, and we need to see what their lifestyle looked like prior to that, because a lot of the time it could have been filled with refined sugars, simple carbs, and many other foods that aren't beneficial for health. So once you've cut all those out and you're eating purely one food, like, you've really taken away what might have actually just been the issue in the first place. So it's very much whenever I see these antidotes from the carnivore movement, they don't necessarily say what they were eating prior to this to feel amazing or for their symptoms to have disappeared.
Yeah. One of the things that I find frustrating about advocates for a carnivore diet is the lack of published data. There's an increasing number of experts, doctors, PhDs, who are lecturing about the positive health effects of a carnivore diet, yet they're not presenting the data of their patient population. And there are, myriad testimonials and myriad people advocating that their carnivore doctor has changed their life and he's changed the life of thousands of people. Yet we don't see a study of these thousands of people. We don't see a study of 100 of them. We don't see a study of 10 of them. So what I would like to see is that the carnivore experts and their patients demand of the carnivore experts to publish data. Show us the money, okay? Show us what is happening over 1 year, over 5 years. I mean, even if you don't have long-term data, show us what's going on with the short-term data, because there's a real glaring lack of published data from the carnivore scientific community. And anecdotal reports just don't cut it. You can't make rational decisions on anecdotal reports. And if the carnivore expert community wants to convince the omnivore and the plant-based community that this is really the way, then show us the data.
Just before we round this off, yesterday I put out a anonymous questionnaire for people to ask you questions. I know people probably weren't too forthcoming with their questions if I knew who they were. So anonymously, and there was 3 that really came back, and one was, what is the average size of the penis? Because it gets people say it's all different sizes, but what is the average size?
Yeah, it's about 5 1/4 inches when it's erect. They can be all different sizes when it's flaccid. Some men are what I call growers. Their penis gets much bigger when it's erect compared to when it's flaccid, and other men are showers, and the difference is much less. And that's because those 2 cylinders, the lining that stretches, some men have a lot of elastin fibers in there, and some men have much less elastin and more collagen. And so don't be concerned about how you stack up to another guy in the locker room or at the public toilet based on the flaccid appearance of the penis, it's a lot less different than you might think when the penis is erect. Now, normal is 2 standard deviations below and 2 standard deviations above average. So a normal sized penis ranges from about a little over 4 inches to about 7 inches. And all that in between is normal. What you see in porn is not normal. It's quite a bit above average in many cases, but that's why they're in porn. When I turn on a basketball game for the NBA, I'm not interested in seeing a bunch of guys like me, 5'8", running around who can't dunk. I want to see guys who can dunk. And those are not normally tall people. Those are extraordinarily tall people. And so same with pornography. Those are extraordinary people in many cases.
In that case, does size matter?
So it appears that size really does not matter. And the reason that I can say that is because there are men that have truly small penises, well below 2 standard deviations. And it's called micropenis. And it is a condition that is related to the hormonal exposure to the penis of the infant when it was developing, and there was lower than normal testosterone levels allowing. And these men, by and large, have satisfying sexual relationships and long-term relationships, emotional, sexual relationships, more than what you would expect if size mattered. The other reason that I can say that size doesn't matter is that the typical length of the vagina is only about 3.5 inches or so, and so men's length is satisfactory for women's depth in the vast majority of cases. And when women are asked, do they wish that their partner had a bigger penis, it's really just a very small percentage who say they do. And it can go in the other direction too. It can be uncomfortable for some women who are paired up with somebody that's too large for them. So in the vast majority of cases, what really matters when it comes to size is the size of your heart. Are you able to relate to your partner on an emotional level? And that's really where the greatest lever is for achieving sexual satisfaction. Is the vast majority of us have the equipment, but do we have the emotional intelligence in that sexual relationship to provide pleasure and satisfaction to a partner?
I would completely agree with that one as well. And the last one was, how does COVID affect erectile dysfunction? This actually came up 3 times, just in different variations of the word. But has COVID had an impact on the penis?
So studies did demonstrate during the height of the pandemic that there could be erectile dysfunction as well as infertility associated with a severe COVID infection. These studies were done in men who were severely afflicted in the ICU or died. And tissue biopsies were performed on the penis, on the testicle, and they could demonstrate negative changes of the cells related to viral infection. But what I don't have the expertise in is the duration and reversibility of the effect. But I will suggest to you that it is primarily a reversible effect. I've had patients who've had transient erectile dysfunction from a bad COVID infection, but then it reverses. The other thing I would point out is that the virulence of COVID infection these days is much less. The sickness that it causes is much milder. And so the likelihood of incurring a meaningful, lasting erectile dysfunction from a COVID infection or infertility from a COVID infection is much less.
So before we round this off, where can we find you if we want to learn more from you? If we want to buy your book, if we just want to find out more about you, where can we go?
Well, my website is aaronspitz.com. My book is The Penis Book. It's available on Amazon and other booksellers. It's also in 6 different languages. So if you, Colin, want to find a copy in Vietnamese or in Chinese while you're down there in Indonesia, you can. It's in Dutch. It's in Italian. It's in oh, I think. Anyway, it's in a bunch of languages. But the book is a good way to take a deeper dive. I'm also on social media, Instagram and Facebook, etc. So please feel free to explore more with me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful for you.
Well, thank you, Colin. And I would like to put in a pitch for an exciting project that I'm working on right now.
Go ahead.
Yes. I, along with a couple of collaborators, have written a musical comedy based on the book called Conversations with My Penis. And it will highlight many of the conditions and situations we've talked about on our podcast here today. And we hope to bring it to stage in New York by 2026. So it's under development, but I'll be posting about it on my social as the project unfolds.
Amazing. Now I didn't need an excuse to go to New York, but now I do. When that airs, I'll be there.
Absolutely. All right. Great. Okay.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much
much,
for
Colin.
being here.
My pleasure. You take